Chapter 44. He hadn't been on all that many commercial spacecraft, but the civil freighters and supply transports were always dirty, cluttered, and claustrophobic. Mira's bridge, on the other hand, much more resembled a military spacecraft in its construction, efficiency, and redundancy. That said, Mira's bridge was a disaster area. After mag-walking 2 meters through the hatch, he stopped and pivoted in a slow 90-degree turn. The bridge was filled with the shadows of floating objects, debris, and corpses. The bodies were the most jarring at first, until he remembered the area might be filled with pine cones. Fighting the prickles crawling up his spine, Dickerson examined every shape. 5 of the shadows worried him. Once certain nothing was coming to attack him from the shadows, Dickerson scanned the wall nearest the hatch. He found what he was looking for and grinned. The emergency generator panel sat recessed on the wall adjacent to the hatch. He opened the panel, swiveled the handle out, and began rotating it. A red light winked with power. Dickerson continued cranking until the light finally turned green. "Here goes nothing," he said, and pressed the power button. Several lights in the large room flickered fitfully. Between the light pulses, he saw the corpses, destruction, and the barest hint of objects he didn't immediately understand. When the few lights finally stabilized, leaving the room in a muted twilight, he gulped. The 12 by 12 meter area held 10 hollow console stations, ergo acceleration couches, and a wealth of pampering niceties, such as its own nutritional dispensers. Mira's bridge was quite possibly the most beautiful he'd ever seen, or rather, had been. 6 bodies floated in the vacuum. In the dim light, he could just barely make out the colors of their jumpsuits. Their once sky-blue uniforms seemed out of place amidst the gray walls. Dickerson peered around the room before finding the dais with the captain's chair. The captain was still in it. Strapped into the combination acceleration couch and command chair, the man looked as though he might still be flying the ship, if not for the scream frozen on his face, that was. He didn't appear to have suffered any direct injuries, other than exposure to both vacuum and absolute zero temperatures. A large divot scarred the wall behind the captain's station. Dickerson furrowed his brow and walked to it. Whatever caused the damage was at least 1 meter across, maybe 2 meters high. It had to have either been traveling at a high rate of speed or massive enough to crack the Atmos steel like plastic.
"Dickerson, status?"
Kelly said. Dickerson rolled his eyes. She asked him to clear the bridge, not sightsee. "Ah, Corporal. From what I can tell, we're clear."
"Copy. We're bringing in Elliot."
He didn't bother responding. After turning from the dais, he looked at the front of the bridge. The blast shutters were down across the majority of the transparent aluminum canopy, except for one. The aluminum had been completely shattered. He checked the sight line between the canopy impact and the dent in the wall. They matched. Whatever had come through the canopy had hit like a cannon shot and impacted with the bulkhead. An arm floated by him, and he caught his breath. There was no way to tell what had happened to the crew, but he thought it likely the damage to the canopy had also managed to turn the aluminum hole into a flechette bomb. The slivers and shards of the thick metal would have been just as effective. Unless the object had been extremely massive, it had to have been traveling quite fast just to puncture a canopy, let alone go right through it. He walked to the starboard side. More of the same kinds of damage. What the hell did it do? Bounce around once it got in here?
"What are you talking about, Dickerson?"
Kelly said. Startled, he turned around instead of checking his HUD. Kelly stood in the hatchway, and Carb had already maglocked Elliot to the wall. "Sorry, Corporal," he said. "Just thinking aloud." Kelly walked to the shutters and the shattered viewport. She turned and looked at the dais.
"Bounced around? You mean whatever hit the canopy?"
"Yes, that's exactly what I mean," he said. He lifted a finger and pointed at the wall. "I don't know what it was, but it was really moving when it came in here."
"Okay,"
she said.
"that worries me."
She walked to the far port side, her helmet constantly swiveling back and forth.
"That worries me a lot." "What does?"
Carb asked through a yawn.
"I don't see what could have done that.
Kelly said.
Nothing in this room could have. Not and survived."
"Shit," Dickerson said. "Okay, yeah, that's bad."
"What are you two talking about?"
Carb asked. "The Corporal is saying," Dickerson said, That whatever did that kind of damage should still be in here, and it's not,
So what?
Carp said.
You saying you crawled back out of here through the canopy?
No, Dickerson said, although I'd actually prefer that. He cleared his throat. I'm betting this damage occurred and someone took it out of here. Kelly walked to the dais and stood over the captain's chair. She shook her head.
Well,
She said,
the bad news is we can't salvage anything here and there's nothing to help us communicate. And what's the good news?
Carb asked.
That we just need to find the auxiliary bridge.
Kelly said, hope in her voice.
If, that is, Dickerson's right and that thing didn't just get up and crawl back into space.
Dickerson brought up Mira's schematics and frowned. Deck 5, midships,
Please tell me that's not near the cargo bay?
Carb said. If only. It's right above it, Dickerson said.
Fuck me.
Carb muttered. She pointed at the missing canopy pane open to space.
Can't we just mag walk out there and see if we can hail someone?
Kelly and Dickerson turned to stare at the rectangle of darkness. Shit, Carb, Dickerson said. Seems like every year or two you have a decent idea.
Uh-huh.
She said.
Like turning down the grav plates to half gravity when I'm riding you?
Dickerson was suddenly glad he had a helmet covering his blushing face. His stammer broke off into silence. The comms filled with Kelly's laughter.
Never tried that before.
Kelly said.
It's fun.
Carb said.
Especially with a man as big as...
I'll do the honors, Dickerson said, cutting her off in mid-sentence. Kelly's laughter grew louder and then subsided.
All right, Lance Corporal, get to it.
Without another word, Dickerson walked forward to the missing pane. The 2x3 meter hole in the canopy had just enough room for him to climb through without risking a rip in his suit. He rose to his full height, locked a glove to the Atmos steel reinforcement, and prepared to pull his legs through the hole.
Hey,
Kelly called. Aye, Corporal? She pulled a tether from her belt and walked to him.
don't want you getting lost out there.
He rolled his eyes beneath the black visor and attached the end of the tether to the suit harness. Thanks, Corporal.
You're welcome. Now see if you can contact Black.
Dickerson pulled himself out the canopy, maglocked himself to the bow, and stared into space. Far in the distance, appearing as little more than a large point of light, lay Pluto. An even tinier dot floated almost on top of it. That was the Pluto Exo Observatory. He suddenly wished it was much larger and much, much closer. Something bumped his foot. He looked down and saw a pine cone. The strange creature lazily turned itself so the bulbous end faced his boot. Its sharp claws slid out. He disengaged his mag boot and kicked the thing. It flew through space for 5 meters before he lost sight of it in the darkness. You have to be careful out here, he told himself. He scanned the area and saw more of the creatures clamped on the hull. He activated his comms. S&R Black, this is Dickerson. Over. No response. S&R Black, come in. No response. He ground his teeth together and turned on his block communication. Black, this is Dickerson. No response. God damn it, he said aloud. Someone please come the fuck in. Something bumped his back. He froze and watched his suit's rear camera feed. 3 pine cones floated behind him, each with their claws extended. The closest one moved forward and bumped him again. Black, this is Dickerson. Come in, Black.
Lance Corporal,
The AI's voice said in his mind.
what is your status?
Thank the void, he muttered. Our status is we need an extraction. We are currently on the main bridge. A pine cone detached itself from the hull and began floating toward his right hand.
Do you have any additional casualties?
Other than Elliot? No. The AI paused before responding. He hated the sensation of black crawling through his thoughts, but the sudden emptiness was even worse.
Lance Corporal,
Black said.
your position is untenable. The remaining skiff and the SV-52 are damaged. The ship has been attacked. We are unable to provide assistance at this time.
Get me the captain, Black,
I am unable to do so at this time.
the computer replied.
However, I recommend you retreat from the bow. My sensors show many objects moving in that direction.
No shit, he said aloud. Where the hell do we go? The AI said nothing, but a map appeared on his HUD. The 3D overlay showed a path leading to a horizontal slip point joining the foredecks to the middecks, as well as to the aft.
According to the schematics, multiple escape pods should be located between the midships and aft junction. If they are still intact and operational,
the AI said,
the squad should be able to use them to escape Mira. We can then pick you up without using either the skiff or the SV-52.
The area was getting crowded. At least a dozen pine cones had ripped free from the hull and began floating around him like satellites. He couldn't stay out here much longer, not if he didn't want to get overwhelmed by them. We were planning on making our way to the auxiliary bridge. Black paused.
An excellent idea, Lance Corporal. The slip point will take you near that area. It is quite possible additional escape pods can be found there.
The bow shuddered. Dickerson minimized the map and checked his camera feeds. Swarms of pine cones drifted about him now, too many to count. The bow shuddered again. I have to leave, he said to the AI. Now.
Good luck, Lance Corporal.
He broke the block connection. Fully focused on the space around him, he realized the creatures were all converging on him. He quickly scaled back down to the broken canopy window and swung himself inside. Corporal, he said, we have to leave, now. A pine cone drifted through the window behind him. Carb raised a finger.
I think he's right.
He didn't have to turn and look. He knew the things were coming into the ship. The deck vibrated beneath his boots.
Okay, Marines,
Mira said, her voice shuddering.
let's get the hell out of here.
Carb removed Elliot from the wall, hoisted him on her shoulder, and headed for the hatch. Mira took point, leaving Dickerson to cover their six. After the rest of the squad walked into the corridor, he turned to look at the room one last time. The pine cones, hundreds of them, were now streaming through the broken canopy. Corporal, he said, we need to close the next hatchway if we don't want a billion of those things following us.
Copy.
He brought up the map Black had sent him and forwarded it to the squad blocks. Black suggested we go this way. Mira continued mag-walking ahead, stepping faster than he thought possible. Carb struggled to keep up. So did he.
Got it,
she said.
When we're safe, I want to know what the AI said.
The long and short versions are the same, he said. We need to find a way off the ship. Help isn't coming anytime soon. Elliot snorted through the comms. His voice dribbled out in a stoned mumble.
Fuck this job.
Chapter 45. Talby unbuckled, hit the cockpit's manual release, and climbed out of the 52. The moment he took off his helmet, the sounds of Gunny's shouts filled his ears. He turned to look over the skiff. Gunny's squad was lifting Noble and helping the captain over the gunwale. What a shit show. The skiff was dinged and battered, but still looked spaceworthy. His 52, on the other hand, was seriously damaged. He peered at the undercarriage and frowned. It was worse than he'd thought. Several thrusters had been smashed by the debris and the pine cones. The cameras were little more than junk. He hadn't seen an SV-52 this damaged since the satellite war. What the hell were those creatures made of? Talby, Dunn yelled from the deck. He stood to his full height. Sir? Dunn had removed his helmet and held it by his left hand. I need a full damage report for both vehicles. He turned his head slightly to watch 3 of Gunny's Marines disappear through the hatch with Noble on a stretcher. He turned back to Talby, eyes flashing with anger. Get cleaned up. Get some nourishment. I'll yell for you in a few. Aye, sir. He cleared his throat. Glad to have you back in one piece. Dunn allowed himself a barely visible grin. Thanks, James. You're welcome, sir. Dunn took in the SV-52, shook his head, and headed out of the cargo bay. He watched the captain disappear and sag slightly. Exhaustion. Too much adrenaline. Too much stress. It was bad enough fighting combatants that shot at you. He knew how to handle that. He'd been in that position more times than he liked to remember. But being attacked by aliens? That was something he didn't want to experience again. But he knew he would. He could count on it. Sir, Gunny growled. Talby turned and saw Gunny standing by the skiff. PFC Copenhaver stood beside him, her bright eyes pulsing with excitement. Apparently, she was in better shape than he was. Aye, Gunny? The sergeant pointed at the skiff. I'll get a damage report to you as soon as possible. He glanced at the SV-52. Also, we can take a look at the 52 if you want to get some rest. Talby shook his head. Thanks, Gunny, but I need to take a look myself. Besides, you two have been mag-walking out there. Go get hydrated. Gunny opened his mouth to speak, but Talby cut him off. That's an order, he said with a smile. Gunny and Copenhaver saluted and walked out of the cargo bay. The silence was welcome. After the rattling fuselage of the SV-52, the multiple impacts dinging off the hull, the crunch of whatever that thing was smashing into him over and over again, and the constant chatter over the comms channel, it was a nice change. Talby walked to the skiff and bent down to check the fuel lines. They seemed intact. He initiated a block connection to the skiff's computer and ran a diagnostic. He knew they were running out of time. The harness was hooked up, except for maybe the last line that the starfish thing might have fried, but they still had work to do. Oakes had to pilot S&R Black beneath Mira and carefully move the ship near the lines. Once he did that, Gunny's squad could secure both ships and they could get moving. Assuming, of course, nothing else came loose or fell apart during the hookup, but that was only the beginning of the journey. Considering the shape Mira was in, they'd have to use a slow acceleration far below S&R Black's capabilities. That meant it might take more than a day just to reach Pluto. If they were lucky, they could use the PEO to moor up Mira while they made some repairs to her hull and superstructure, and... no, he said aloud. Fuck that. The ship was infested with those creatures. Who knew what else was aboard her? And whatever caused that radiation blast was still aboard. He took in a slow breath and exhaled in a long stream. Should they even risk towing her back to Pluto? What if another radiation blast went off and this time bathed everything with high-intensity gamma rays? Could Black's shield hold against that? He wondered. That was another question to ask Dunn and the AI. The diagnostic finished, and the report flashed across his block. He frowned. Damage to cameras, damage to two thrusters. At least they'd be easy to repair. He turned and walked back to the SV-52. After making a block connection, he ran the diagnostic program. The onboard computer took its time, giving him more of a chance to map out the parts they'd need to patch the support vehicle's hull, as well as the canopy. Thruster damage, cameras destroyed, more dings and dents than he'd ever seen on a space-worthy vehicle. Yup, Mira was starting to piss him off. While the diagnostic continued, he looked over at the flechette rifles. One had a different colored magazine. Curious, Talby took it from its place, ejected the mag, and studied the rounds. They looked the same as normal flechettes, but had a bisected, tapered end. Must be what the PFC shot the starfish thing with. The magazine seemed heavier in his hands than normal flechettes. Where the hell did you find these? He wondered. He replaced the magazine and returned the rifle to the rack. The SV-52's diagnostic finished, and his block lit up with the report. His frown grew as he looked over the damage. It was extensive. If they were lucky, it would take an hour to fix. If Noble wasn't in the goddamn medical bay, he could probably get it done in half the time. Talby loosed a sigh and removed his gloves. His flight suit was soaked. What he needed was a shower, a vape, and a lot of sleep. When Dunn's voice broke through the speakers, he knew none of that was going to happen. Chapter 46. By the time they reached the next junction with the hatch, Callie's rear camera feed showed what looked like thousands of pine cones following them. The creatures were packed into the corridor so tightly she was surprised they could move.
I'm going to make a little room,
Dickerson said. Do it, Callie replied. Dickerson turned and fired his flechette rifle into the throng. A flash of light exploded across her rear camera feed, punctuated by a storm of electricity. The cluster of pine cones broke apart, debris from shattered carapaces flying in all directions.
Christ, Dickerson!
Carb yelled. Debris from the explosion flew through the corridor, bumping against her suit.
Trying to puncture Elliot's suit? No.
Dickerson drawled.
Trying to keep y'all alive.
Callie increased her pace. We may need to jet. Next hatch is 10 meters away.
Not going to be easy,
Dickerson said.
This corridor is a bit small for that.
We can do it, Kelly said. She glanced at Dickerson's rear camera feed on her HUD. The pine cones had already flowed past the explosion, following them like a plague. Dickerson, hit them with another round on my mark, and then get your ass in the air. Carb, detach and start jetting. I'll cover Dickerson after he shoots. Get to that hatch.
Aye, boss.
Carb said. Kelly moved to the wall and flattened herself to give Carb room. The Marine's boots demagnetized, and she lightly extended her toes. Carb activated their jets and flew past Kelly. Be ready to shoot. We don't know what's up there,
Aye, boss.
Carb said. Kelly turned and faced Dickerson. He was walking backwards, his movements awkward. The creatures were no more than 7 meters away and coming fast. Now, she said. Dickerson fired. The flechette round struck the swarm with the same results as before. As soon as the round left his rifle, Dickerson turned and jetted. He flew past her, faster than she'd imagined Dickerson would retreat. Kelly aimed and fired into the swarm. She didn't bother hanging around to watch the fireworks. After turning away from the cluster of creatures, she did her best to focus on the corridor in front of her, but she couldn't help glancing at the rear cam. The swarm was thicker than ever, the pine cones flying through the remains of their detonated flock, seemingly oblivious to the attack. The corridor met a T-junction ahead. She could already see the open hatch, Carb next to it, her hands pumping the emergency generator. Kelly held her rifle in one hand, keeping one free to stop her progress after she crossed the threshold. Another glance at the rear feed showed the creatures were closer. A scant 3 meters separated her from the hundreds of pine cones clogging the corridor. Carb, she said, close that fucking hatch now! 4 meters, 3 meters, 2. Kelly spiked her jets and flew at 6 meters per second toward the hatch. Carb had heard her and was closing it. Kelly had just enough room to fit, she hoped. She flew through the mere meter-wide remaining space, her left side clipping the hatch edge. Kelly yelped, smarting at the pain in her left side. The armor took the worst of it, but she felt the snap of a rib. She glanced at the rear camera feed and watched the hatch close behind her. At least,
Watch out!
Dickerson yelled. She flicked her eyes back to the front camera feed. Clipping the hatch had changed her trajectory and sent her flying toward the corridor wall. She pushed her arm out, elbow bent to take the worst of the crash, and extended her legs to do the same. The jolt of the impact rattled her bones and smashed her teeth together. As she started to bounce off the wall, she activated her magnetics. One foot locked her to the bulkhead. She floated in the air, heart hammering and breathing like a bellows.
Corporal, we're clear,
Dickerson said. Great, Kelly said through gritted teeth. Christ, that had hurt. The pain in her side made her eyes vibrate. She closed them and rested, her body still attached to the wall by a single foot. Something touched her shoulder, and she started, the pain in her ribs racking her body once more.
Sorry, Corporal,
Dickerson said. She turned her head and saw his glove on her shoulder.
You okay?
She chuckled despite the pain. Been better, she said.
Well, let's get you off the wall, Corporal,
he said. She deactivated her magnetics and relaxed. Dickerson gently pulled her from the wall, turned her body, and set her on the deck. She activated her boots again and bent slightly at the waist. That was a mistake. She felt the rib move slightly.
Damn,
Carb said.
that was some nice flying.
Kelly looked up and saw Carb standing by the hatch, Elliot clamped to the wall. Thanks, Kelly managed. I'm really tired of this fucking ship trying to kill us.
Copy that,
Dickerson said. He turned around to face the empty corridor. The darkness here was as intense as every other place on the derelict. His suit lights penetrated the gloom just enough to make out the shadows of recessed doors.
Well, I guess they're trapped over there now.
Kelly didn't dare shake her head for fear of her brain leaking out of her ears. We can't assume that. No telling how many ways they can get past that,
Agreed.
Carb said. Elliot groaned through the comms.
Are you people done trying to kill me yet? No.
Dickerson said in a flat monotone.
We're using you as bait. Great.
Elliot said.
Let me know when I can die in peace.
Carb laughed at that.
Not yet, big man. Not yet. Good.
He said.
I was beginning to worry.
Kelly brought the map up on her HUD. Shit, she said. We should have taken that junction. We're off course.
Of course we are,
Dickerson said.
but at least we're not getting smothered. Where are we going anyway?
Carb asked.
I hope they have a masseuse.
Kelly rolled her eyes. What did Black say, Dickerson?
Well, we're sort of fucked, Corporal. Sounds like S&R Black had an encounter with those little beasties behind us, as well as something else.
Dickerson paused for a second.
Black suggested we get our asses to the auxiliary bridge and look for escape pods. Fuck's sake.
Carb said.
Why can't they just come and get us already? I think they're a little busy at the moment.
Dickerson said.
I think they have to do some repairs before they can even try.
Shit, Kelly said. What did the Pinecones do, anyway? Dickerson shrugged.
No clue. Didn't exactly have long to talk.
Okay, Kelly said. Then I guess we head for the auxiliary bridge. If we're lucky, we can find a transmitter.
Or another breach in the hull,
Carb said.
Although I'd rather not go out there with just a suit and a flechette rifle. Copy that,
Dickerson said.
Can't say I liked it much.
He gestured to her.
You hit the hatch. How bad is it?
Cracked or broke a rib, she said. Hurts like one of Gunny's bitch-out sessions. Carb and Dickerson both laughed. Elliot let out a wheezy giggle.
You haven't seen shit yet, Corporal.
Elliot said.
You obviously haven't fucked up bad enough yet to really get both barrels.
Kelly smiled despite the pain. Great, she said. I look forward to it. Hell, he can yell at me all he wants once we get back aboard Black.
No shit,
Dickerson said.
I'd love a Gunny shouting session right now. So now we have a reason to live,
Carb said, a grin in her voice.
Get back to the ship so we can do push-ups. Only after the auto dock.
Elliot said.
I can still feel my fingers, but the hand is gone.
Silence filled the comms. Amputation. Elliot was going to need a prosthetic, and they sure as shit didn't have that tech back on the ship. They'd have to get back to Trident Station to make that happen. Even if his body wasn't recovering from shock, he'd have a hell of a time operating like that. She wasn't even sure he could handle a rifle. Kelly studied the map again. My O2 sensor is damaged. How much oxygen do each of you have remaining? Elliot's suit was the only one running low. He had about 30 minutes before he exhausted his supply. That meant they'd have to find another emergency refill station. At least this time, they wouldn't have to get him out of a shattered suit. All right, Marines, Kelly said. Let's move out.
Affirmative, boss,
Carb said. She mag-walked to Elliot.
Get ready, man. Right,
Elliot said.
I love being luggage. Well, it's about the most useful you've been in years.
Carb said.
Fuck you.
Elliot wheezed.
Maybe later when you have two hands.
Carb said.
Let's go.